everybody. Welcome to this very special edition of the B4 Business Brunch on International Women's Day 2021. My name is Sarah Foster and I am Managing Partner of the Oxford office of Flourish. We are a national law firm with 13 offices across the UK. I am joined today by 6 other business leaders in the local community who I will ask to introduce themselves very shortly. But just by way of introduction, obviously here we are today on International Women's Day 2021. We are still in the middle of a national lockdown caused by the global pandemic, of which we are all aware. Who would have anticipated on International Women's Day 2020 that how we would be a year later, with most of us having worked from home now for almost a year? How the vast majority of us have been bearing up with that. In the context of International Women's Day 2021, we all felt that we couldn't let this year go by without having a look at, in quite some detail, about COVID, the impacts of the pandemic, particularly on women, the challenges we faced, what we've learned from it, and how we may deal with things differently going forwards. So without further ado, and before we get started, I will ask everyone to introduce themselves, starting with Megan.
Hello everybody, I'm Megan Carter, Head of HR for Blenheim Palace.
Thank you, Megan. Ruth?
I'm Ruth Hawkins. I'm one of 3 female partners in Boardman, Hawkins and Osborne, which is a specialist family law firm based in Abingdon in South Oxfordshire.
Thank you, Ruth. Nadine?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I work at Nielsen IQ, where I am commercial leader across Europe, Pacific and Asia for our consumer intelligence business unit.
Thank you, Nadine. Alice?
Hello, everyone. I'm a sustainability advisor based in Austria, but working globally, particularly in other European countries as well as Asia and Africa.
Thank you, Alice. Nicola?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Wallbank and I am a solicitor. I do employment law and I'm a solicitor at Julian Taylor Solicitors. We're a specialist employment law practice.
Thank you, Nicola. And finally, Marie.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Mari O'Connor and I head up the Conference Oxford office.
Hello, thank you all. So I'm going to start with quite a general question, I think. Obviously, having been through this pandemic for the last year or so, what particular challenges do you think that women have faced during this pandemic? If I start perhaps with Alice.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to take this one. Well, I think, there's a lot of challenges that all of us have experienced. But before speaking about the specific challenges women have faced, I'd just like to emphasize that I think what's peculiar about this pandemic is that it's all affected us in such different ways. Yeah, it's affected men and women in different ways, but all of us, all women living, presumably in a sort of similar bubble, in a similar region, with relatively stable incomes. We've already been quite differently affected. And so one dividing line has been, do you have children or not? Well, children of sort of young age, school age, because I think that's really one where also women and men have had an extremely difficult and different experience as well. It's largely been women who've been dealing with the homeschooling, the caretaking, caring not only for younger children, but of course also for elderly parents, perhaps, that they didn't want to leave in care homes. So I think that's a really important one. But also the sectors, the economic sector threatened by unemployment, where furlough schemes perhaps couldn't help. And again, I'm speaking about the Austrian European context, but I think a lot of that is applicable in the UK as well, are the ones where women work: gastronomy, tourism, retail, hairdressers, beauticians, and so on. And I think lastly, all of this triple burden that women have had to deal with, it's not particularly new, right? I mean, we've known that women have had these double and triple roles, but this has really become much stronger. And the issue is now that on top of all of this, what women, I think, begin to deal with mental health issues. We're seeing that with teenagers, with young children, but they don't even have the time to to go and seek care. So I think this is something that's also going to come out in the data as we go on. And I think there are quite a few other issues, but I'd also like to leave the floor to others, of course.
Thank you, Alice. Nicola, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, Alice made some really good points about the sectors that women tend to be more heavily represented in, which have been more adversely impacted by COVID. I think as well, generally speaking, women are more likely to be engaged on temporary contracts or 0 hours contracts. And that's another thing where those sorts of contracts, those sorts of more flexible working engagements tend to be more heavily occupied by women. And therefore, that's been an area where more women have been impacted. I think as well, the fact that in the UK, furlough was never really clearly articulated as a right for those with caring responsibilities. It was something that women could ask for, or anybody could ask for if they were finding that they were having to homeschool in parallel with their working duties, but it was never something that employers had to agree to. Whereas I think in some other countries, that was something that was sort of, okay, if you're having to juggle with children as well, then yes, you are entitled to request and to go on to furlough. And that was something that I think presented lots of challenges for people, because I think a lot of women then forced into situations where they were having to sort of start to have those conversations with their employers, and were sort of forced into having difficult conversations that perhaps put them in difficult positions in the workplace. So yeah, I think there have been lots of challenges.
Yeah, exactly right. And Megan, anything from your perspective?
Yeah, I think wonderful points, especially from a personal point of view, the homeschooling, it is a big challenge. And also more women than men have been furloughed in the UK. As well. So again, that impacts on mental health and all sorts of things. But yes, it's significant impact on women and not just women, but men carers as well.
Yeah, exactly right.
Can I just say, Sarah, I just was going to refer to the fact that there was a Commons Select Committee on Women and Equalities published a really interesting report called Unequal Impact, Coronavirus and the Gendered Economic Impact. I'd really recommend that as reading to anybody who's interested in this sort of topic, because it, from a UK perspective, really sets out how women have been more adversely impacted. And I'm sure we can find a way of sharing the link to that afterwards.
Yeah, no, fantastic point, Nicola. Yes, I enjoyed reading that myself over the last few days. I mean, just on the homeschooling, I'm sure a lot of us are breathing a sigh of relief today in the UK with the children going back to school, which is one of the challenges now that thankfully has been put behind us, hopefully for fingers crossed for good. I'm never the best teacher, I definitely say. So
can I just mention as well, I think we all know what social animals women are. We like our company, we love to see our colleagues every day. And I think it has, this whole lockdown situation has created an isolation for us.
yes.
Even if we haven't got children at home. And it has almost put women back in the home.
Yes.
Where society has always said, a woman's place is in the home. And I just think that that's a major thing we have to now battle almost all over again.
Yes.
That isolation from our colleagues and sort of juggling the everyday, because they're the challenges we're facing all the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Just moving on then. So obviously just taking into account those challenges we've talked about, and one of the things that Nicola mentioned was the fact that women perhaps have had to have conversations with their employers in terms of their working conditions and hours, etc., in a way that they might not have done so in the past. Do we think then that those challenges that all women have been facing are likely to help or hinder us in a post-COVID world? Ruth, I don't know if you would like to kick off with that one.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, isn't it? I agree with everything that has just been said about the previous question, and I think using our own organisation, we haven't needed to furlough anybody until fairly recently, and what we've found is that most of our staff team have been very able. We're all female team, as it happens. It's that's the current situation. We've all been quite flexible, and we've really quite relished that flexibility of working around our childcare or our caring commitments or our other commitments. I've heard people from outside of our organisation as well saying that they have taken longer lunch breaks to go and do their exercise and get some fresh air and things like that. So I think just being able to take that flexibility during the working week has been quite freeing in some respects, although the flip side is that it's also got some real negatives, because there's that bleed either side of the day often where work continues into the evening in a way that it might not have done previously.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very valid point, Ruth, that I absolutely love the flexibility that we all now enjoy. But from my perspective, the 5 days of a working week perhaps have now translated into 7 days, and they all sort of merge into one. Yeah. And, when you do everything on those 7 days, which, obviously have pros and cons. Mary, do you have anything else to add to that?
What I was going to say was I absolutely agree with Ruth. I think that the dangers are that the day does extend. It starts earlier and it seems to finish later. And it's interesting because my husband will often say, close your computer now. They seem to, I won't say that. He seems to have a discipline that says the end of the day finishes now, whereas I can't pass the computer without thinking, oh, I wonder if that person got back to me, or I'll just catch up on this. And so the day extends, and that brings its own pressure almost. Like you said, it goes from 5 days to 7 days, and it's having to deal with that and say, no, stop it. I find that difficult.
Yeah. What about you, Alice? You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I fully agree. This home office is a double-edged sword. I've actually been working in the home office for about 10 years, but without the school attached and without all of that attached. And I think it's interesting because across European countries, apparently 2/3 of people really love working from home if it's not every day. But there's a third that really thrive on going to the office. And I think it's what Mary mentioned. So this is a really important point. And people are different. Men and women are different. So I think this other point about COVID basically having put an end to positive developments that were there in terms of gender equality. That's something that we need to consider. It's not unlikely, I think, that also with the austerity measures that might come, right, that sort of will need to be put in place to compensate for all the debts that we've been taking up. I think unless women's interests and this continued sort of work towards closing the gender pay gap, etc., is taken into account, I think that can sort of mean that we're moving in the wrong direction in the longer term. But I also think the fact that we have been doing homeschooling and the fact that we have been doing extra care as general people not trained in that makes us all appreciate these kind of professions more. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's a positive sort of a trend that hopefully will continue. Because after all, COVID has changed a lot, but what it really has done is shown a light on things that weren't working before. And if it means that we now recognize what needs to be done, that these things are being discussed and debated, then that's also an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've all learnt a lot about ourselves and about our colleagues, etc., throughout this pandemic. So what are your key learnings from working through the pandemic, and how is that likely to influence your behaviours going forwards? Nadine, I don't know if you would like to start with that.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything everyone said so far, by the way, but we are all experiencing it very differently. So there are different learnings. Personally, I found it very difficult being at home permanently. But I think going forward, the concept of flexibility, we need to really expand out the definition. Flexibility doesn't just mean work from home. It means working flexibly, which could be working at different times in the day, at different locations, in different areas. So I think employers and employees alike need to really expand out that definition and have very open and transparent conversations about what that means, and also ensure that to some extent those conversations can be very customized, because not everyone is the same, and you will get different responses from different people dependent on their circumstances, but also their preferences. And I think a lot of us have learned a lot about our preferences. I mean, just to pick up on what Mari was saying, we are all social animals, and I've really missed that aspect, as I'm sure other people have. So going forward, the learnings really are that as an organisation, we need to just dedicate more time to really understanding the preferences of the individual that will work mutually for that business overall, and be much more open to ensuring that we attach that much more empathy and trust in the conversations that we're having two-way. Yeah, and I'm speaking from quite a corporate position there, but equally I think that translates throughout, regardless of what size the organisation is. It has to be based on trust and empathy.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I think during this pandemic, we've all been communicating a lot, even if it has to be through these sort of virtual means. But from my perspective, obviously speaking to people in their homes, perhaps getting to know more about them as individuals and what actually makes them tick has been a benefit for me. Megan, have you got anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think how adaptable we all really are to change. If you would think a year ago, the situation we're in now, and perhaps we need to keep the momentum going with changing, but being at the forefront of that change. So, for example, with flexible working, like Nadine was saying, this should have probably been the case a long time ago, and now it's been propelled obviously forward. But we can innovate, we can lead, we can motivate, we can inspire, through flexible working and remotely. And I don't want that to be lost. And I think that could be one of the key things and learnings from 2020 is, dispelling that myth of if your bum's on the seat, it obviously means that you're working hard if you're in the office, because we've proved that that's absolutely not the case. You can innovate, you can create, and you can lead remotely. And my learning is to maybe think about change a bit more before it happens and try and influence that. Yeah.
Nicola?
Yeah, just to echo what the others have said, really, I think really good points there. And I think, we need to be proud that as a nation, everybody's adapted so well to converting to home working, which is great. And I think that challenged a lot of people's views. Lots of employers would have said, no, we cannot possibly do this. And yet we did. And people have realized that it works. But we need to go beyond that. And, just because we allow home working doesn't actually mean that going forwards we're presenting people with the flexibility that they need, particularly women, and that all really in the longer term home working does is save people their commute. It doesn't take away all their responsibilities that they have at home and allow them to better juggle childcare responsibilities and everything else. So I think there is definitely more work to be done, but I think that we should take the positives from this, that people's thinking has been challenged, and look, we can actually embrace new ways of doing things, and we can be more accommodating and more flexible. So let's use that as a platform to keep that going. And I think that's really important. But I do think that there are, legislative changes that could be, could be a part of that as well. I know there's talk at the moment, in order to make flexible working requests, people need to have 26 weeks of service, and there's some question mark over really, is that appropriate? And actually, should people be able to request flexible working from the off? And there's also talk about enhancing protections for women who are pregnant or on maternity leave in a redundancy context. So, I think there's some important legislative changes that need to support this movement forwards as well.
Yeah, no, that's a very key point. I think certainly this idea as well about flexibility, does that go far enough? At our firm during the pandemic, we've introduced an agile working policy because we had that very much in mind, that you can't just talk about flexible working, it doesn't go far enough. And obviously for us, we'll have to see how that actually works once we are back in the office, and how people want to use it in terms of working when they want, where they want, and how they want. And it will be interesting to see how that actually works in practice.
I think as well, it's an interesting thing. Traditionally, perhaps it's been, requests for part-time working has traditionally been seen more as a sort of, it's something that a woman asks for to be able to accommodate childcare. And actually, I think perhaps culturally what we need is a move towards actually flexibility to allow everybody to balance work and home. And then that shifts away from it being just something a woman needs to be able to look after children, to just something that we have as the sort of default that then will help to sort of close those stereotypes. I mean, that might be dreaming to an extent, but I think that's all part of the same shift.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a bit about flexibility, and I suppose my next question really tries to develop that a bit further in terms of what aspects of flexibility should employers focus on as we exit the pandemic. Ruth, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think that's quite a hard thing, because obviously different things mean different things to different organisations. So thinking about our own team, we're quite small, we're quite niche. We're also, partly a litigation firm. So the court system, whilst it's moved with the times because it's had to during COVID and during the pandemic, is still quite an old traditional organisation, and court hearings tend to be from 10 till about 4:35. There are moves afoot to extend that time somewhat, but if we're working within that system, we've got to work within those sorts of hours, so that doesn't quite work with the really flexible, agile system of working when you want around your childcare or your caring commitments or your mental health commitments or desire to work part-time or whatever, because you might have hearings or advocates meetings or things to do outside of those times. So I think for our own organisation, we've got the desire to move forward and be much more flexible, much more agile, to use the word, going forward. But it's amidst the context of working within the system that we're working in. Things are improving, but they're not quite there.
Yeah. Megan.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Ruth. And the thing about flexible working requests at the moment is they're not flexible. So you request to work within a certain time, that's not flexible. So I need to start at 10 and I need to start at 1. I think it just the whole thing needs to kind of be turned upside down and rethought. And it's very much an individual thing as well. So it needs to be, the flexible working system needs to be flexible.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just add? I think these things don't work unless the entire company has bought into it. So you could have legislation and you can have a statement and a policy within the business, but unless everybody is living and breathing and allowing for people to feel comfortable in the way that they're working, it's just never going to work. And a lot of that is ensuring that people don't feel that they have to apologise because they're not going to be in the office or because they're not going to be available at a certain point in time. And that is all going to take time. But I think it is also important that this is across the board. So you have to have senior roles engaging in flexible working, not just personally in terms of how they're doing it, but ensuring that they're really, talking about it openly, ensuring that companies have support for managers, how to have those discussions with your employees around flexible working, because you'll have flexible working managers managing people who are flexibly working, but ultimately you've still got to get the job done. So you do need to offer that level of support to ensure that people don't feel that it's something that they have to, spend 3 weeks mustering up the courage to ask for or to even implement against. It has to become a way of working that is culturally accepted, and that culture is often driven from the top. So you need that many role models really to ensure that the whole sentiment is really being embraced.
And I also think, we should learn from the past. We've lost some really good workers, women workers, because we can't get away from the fact that women are the people who do have the children, who do have the babies, and there has to be that flexibility around that period of time when a woman is pregnant and has to go off and have the baby and spend time with her. We need to be more mindful of that and get those clever, hardworking women back into the workplace. And it's almost like, we look at it as she's been off and she's had a baby. And no, look at the talent of the person. Look at this hardworking woman and get her back into the workplace and make her feel that she's needed and wanted, as opposed to making excuses almost.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to just add that sometimes we seem to be treating flexibility as if it was an end in itself. And I think what it should be is really a means to achieving better quality of life, essentially, for everyone. And I think we also need to understand that not everyone feels, because sometimes flexibility is very much about it has the air of lack of rules and things. And some people actually feel really comfortable in, more structured, rigid systems. So we also need to cater for these kind of people. And then importantly, and I think Nadine has mentioned it, I mean, it's flexibility on the sort of employees sort of end, but it shouldn't translate into the employer's flexibility, then, calling the employee on the weekend, for example. So I think that's also a fine line to be.
No, very, very true. And I think you're right to mention, flexibility, work-life balance. And I know this is International Women's Day, but people have mentioned it's for men too, so that everyone can have this more, hopefully equal balance, which would be fantastic. So final question, and I know we haven't got very long for this one, but certainly in the early days of the pandemic, there were a number of female global leaders who got lots of plaudits and credits for the way that they had handled the pandemic. What differences do you observe between the leadership styles of men and women? And do we think that women do perform better in periods of uncertainty, such as the one that we're currently experiencing? Alice, do you want to start with that?
Sure, and yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, leaders like Angela Merkel in Germany or Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. If you look to them and their leadership, and then compare them with people like Trump and Bolsonaro in Brazil, I mean, it really it's a very it shows a very gray and white, black and white picture, a very polarized picture. But of course, the truth is somewhere in between. But what I'm noticing is also in terms of the topics that have come up today in this discussion, we talk about multitasking, we talk about flexibility, we talk about agreeing with others, right? And all of these are typically female traits. And I absolutely think that in times of crisis where, the future is even more unpredictable than it normally is, where you have to juggle several responsibilities, where you have to listen rather than just, storm ahead with an answer. I think it's exactly where female qualities and female leaders can actually be really successful. And I mean, there is a thing called the feminine economy. It's a concept by someone called Jennifer Ambrose, and who talks about exactly that. I think that's quite beautiful. I'm very happy to share it.
Thank you, Alice. And Marie, have you got
well, I did a lot of reading up on this actually just before our session. I'm sure we all have, but it soon became very obvious to us that those women leaders, and actually there are only 19 out of nearly 200 countries that have women leaders, which is interesting. And the research clearly shows that women leaders they reacted more quickly and more decisively in the face of potential fatalities. They were very risk averse in terms of saving those lives, and they were more prepared, to take the risks where the economy side of things, where, you know, it was more important to save people and to keep people safe. And I think that's almost, and I don't know if this is the wrong thing to say, but it's almost that mothering instinct that we have. And you're absolutely right, Alice. We have a talent for listening and listening to all viewpoints, as opposed to the viewpoint we think is right and just go with that.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm conscious of the time. I think we're at the end of our allotted time. So thank you very much to everyone involved today. And I hope that all who are watching it have found it interesting. And here's to the time when we can all socially get back together in person. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.